I had to look up on Google what the actual shape for Buckminster fullerene was, and then start the video over because I didn't want to be wrong. It's a truncated icosahedron, which means you take an icosahedron and you chop off the intersective points. What's interesting about molecules is that they're kind of like Rubik's Cubes in a sense that different versions of the same molecule have different meanings and expressions in an energetic landscape. The human brain is a perfect tool to analyze the spectrum of possible expressions of this energy, because the human brain is basically an energy decoder. What I mean by this is when you look out and you see things that surround you, your eyeballs are taking energy from your brain and interacting with electromagnetic radiation in the real world. And in order, for you to see an image, when you look at something, there has to be energy involved. There has to be energy for the visual cortex to communicate with the eyeballs and in turn create an experience. And I'm not going to go into my philosophies on how that happens. That is in a different video. But the point is that when you put certain energy out into the world with your brain and observational powers of measurement, you see things differently. When people drink alcohol, their vision gets blurry. You know what I'm saying? The same reality exists regardless, but that is evidence that depending on the kind of energy that your brain is using, the expression of vision is going to be different. So, energy and molecules specifically are sort of like the language that energy uses to express itself, and the human brain is the interpreter of these different structures. Just like vitamins and minerals provide different effects, and water and everything that you put into your body is a form of energy. So Buckminster fullerene is interesting to me because the icosahedron in sacred geometry, in certain school of sacred geometry, is considered to be the ultimate shape representing Earth. The dodecahedron represents the universe at all, which I find interesting because I'm not sure which one was discovered first, but many believed the sphere to be the perfect shape because all points on its surface are equidistant to the center. And, an icosahedron and a dodecahedron being very similar in the sense that, they're almost spherical in nature, yet they have different faces. And so in sacred geometry, you're going to have the two-dimensional representation, which the face of a platonic solid has a two-dimensional shape. And different shapes represent different things specifically. I've heard that the triangle represents the mind. Alex Gray, who is an artist and a psychedelic person, let's just say, really is my credible source for sacred geometry. I know there's a series on Gaia about it with that one guy, Gilbert something. But there's a reason that the Greeks and other ancient cultures used geometry and thought of it as sacred. And that is because the principles of the physical world function on geometric patterning and properties, and things like orbit, things like time itself are geometric. And lower dimensional vibrations, aka vibrations that only exist in linear space or in Euclidean space, like flat surface, or even like a curved space in a sense, um, govern things like orbit and gravity and you know wind patterns and stuff, things that are in motion are moving in relation to their system as a whole. And so you get this Russian nesting doll situation, kind of like how you observe the world, but you also observe yourself observing the world, and then who is making that observation. Now, patterns are like progress points, and the universe as a whole tends towards patterns. Now, what this could mean is that right next door to us could be an identical universe with one possibility changed. The smallest setting on the dials moved over the smallest amount. Infinity truly insinuates a level of detailing beyond human comprehension. Therefore, if we imagine a multiverse, we have encoding on higher levels based on the principle of holographic compression, which is a term that I created, which basically means you take all the information of a system and you physically encode it on the surface of that system. Well, if you have a flat surface, you can have a curved surface. And then you can also have a, what do they call hyperbolic surface? You could have spheres. You could have a grid of spheres, and each sphere contains the contents of all the information of the entire system, but they differ in the sense that the properties that govern, what happens on the inside are different for each one. So basically, you have a non changeable parameter in the universe that keeps the separate structures of each sphere from interacting with each other. Because if the Higgs field were tweaked, there would be no Higgs boson, there would be no physical world. It would all just be nonsense. And if the electromagnetic field were tweaked, the spectrum of radiation would be completely different. You know what I'm saying? If gravity were tweaked, the solar systems wouldn't have formed the way they did. And so the laws of physics are what we're talking about here when we're talking about the settings on the sphere. Each one is a little bit different than the last. And I'm totally alluding to Indra's net with this metaphor because anyone who's had a perfect moment, which I never have inside of that space, will tell you that no matter how perfect, that it's like the valence or like the symmetry or like whatever is surrounding the person, in the physical world, I'm not sure. But even in the most blissful Indra's net moments, there's something that's discernible. It's not 100% fluid, infinite. You can get close, but like, I'm not saying that Indra's net is, the space where humans can view the multiverse as a whole. But it is a space where you can view a fundamental representation that I think is perfect as a metaphor for the multiverse, because we're encoding information in a higher space, which is the container that Indra's net is inside. You know what I mean? The space between the spheres is one dimension higher than the spheres themselves. And so if you can encode each sphere onto a curved surface, like a circular two-dimensional, representation, then you could encode the entire experience in a lower dimensional space. And this is what black holes are. They're portions of the fabric of space-time that have inverted and regressed into a two-dimensional existence, which is actually mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean, the entropy of the surface of a black hole dictates what is inside of the black hole, which is the holographic principle. And so if this is applicable via transdimensionality, then the entire universe could easily be, even with Newtonian mechanics, a hologram. You know what I'm saying? And so just on the edge is the quote-unquote event horizon, which is actually the space between this universe and the one right next to it.